There are few games with resumes as illustrious as that of Final Fantasy VII. From helping elevate Sony's PlayStation line into a household name, to making North American RPG localization more viable, Final Fantasy VII fundamentally changed the landscape of video games as we know it. It's the best-selling game in the Final Fantasy series, it spawned its own multimedia compilation, and it's one of the most beloved video games of all time. Now, over 23 years after Final Fantasy VII's initial release, let's take a look at the long-awaited Final Fantasy VII Remake. After endless rumors, numerous teases, and years of waiting, how fares this return to the city of Midgar? Let's find out. But first, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to get notified whenever I post new videos. I have tons of videos in the catalog already, including 2 Final Fantasy retrospectives, one covering the making of Final Fantasy VII and the other looking back at Final Fantasy XIII, so check those out. Now without further ado, let's begin. This review and the related footage is based on both a physical and a digital retail copy of the game for the PlayStation 4. Final Fantasy VII Remake follows a mercenary named Cloud and his journey through the city of Midgar. There, he joins forces with Avalanche, an anti-establishment organization helmed by Barrett Wallace and composed of members Jesse, Biggs, Wedge, and Cloud's childhood friend Tifa. Together, Cloud and Avalanche oppose the Shinra Electric Power Company, which runs Midgar. As our heroes rebel against the corrupt Shinra regime, they also find themselves trailing the mysterious man in a black cape. Unsurprisingly, Remake is practically the same story as the Midgar portion of Final Fantasy VII. Most of the major story beats are present, and the ebb and flow of the narrative has that comforting familiarity to it. However, that's not to say these stories are identical. Where Final Fantasy VII's Midgar section was a sprint, Remake opts to follow a more scenic route. Remake tells a much more personal tale, with greater emphasis on relationships and backstories. Through this lens, certain aspects of the story come across much stronger in Remake than they did in the original game, with perhaps none being more drastic than the city itself. Midgar has always been a very distinct place in the world of Final Fantasy VII. One of my favorite things about Midgar's portrayal is the dichotomy between life on the upper plate and life in the slums. Midgar's upper plate, referred to in Remake as Topside, is the residence of everyone from the upper middle class all the way up to the social elite. The upper plate itself is a giant pizza-like structure in the sky held aloft over the other half of Midgar society, the slums. The slums are where the working class resides, and the difference in wealth between people living in the slums and people on the top side is vast. In the original game, it's never overtly addressed, but most of the slums are built from the discarded refuse of the upper plate. Homes are built out of train carriages, places have rusted and broken sheet metal for walls and roofing. There's a distinct absence of pavement anywhere you go. This is in direct contrast with the privileged life of people that literally live above the working class. All this holds true in Remake, with extra little tidbits in the city to hammer the point home. There's a real sense of community beneath the plate, and players get to experience this community in even greater detail thanks to new quests, new activities, and new story beats. All this is carried by a great cast of characters, both old and new, with many returning characters being given vibrant new life. Aerith specifically really shines, and you can tell there was a lot of care and thought put into her personality and portrayal. One thing I'll say about the story is that, as a fan of the original, there were moments of Remake that had me saying, "What is happening? This isn't Final Fantasy VII." I kept thinking certain events were about to happen due to my knowledge of the original story, only for there to be a relatively wide berth of new content. Not that the new content isn't good, it is. I really enjoy all the world building and interpersonal interactions. It just caught me off guard. For returning players, I think it's best to enter Remake without any preconceived notions regarding what is and is not the story of Midgar. Ultimately, I love the story of Final Fantasy VII, and thus my love for the story of Remake is inevitable. Through my 40 or so hours with the story, I found myself embraced with the same childlike wonder that I had in the 90s. Some players may find the new content to be more fluff and filler compared to the much leaner Midgar of yesteryear. But I think Remake does an excellent job at bringing what is, in essence, the prologue of Final Fantasy VII into the modern era. The audio is exceptional. This despite the odd decision to recast the voice actors. I'd be lying if I said I didn't miss the original cast, specifically Quentin Flynn as Reno and George Newbern as Sephiroth. They've just become so iconic to me in those roles. However, the new cast is great. Everyone sounds really believable in their roles, and I think Aerith and Jesse in particular are awesome.
Just my luck.
I heard that, you know.
The music of the game is also incredible. Classic tracks have been reorchestrated. There are multiple versions of a few songs to solidify particular leitmotifs. There are even reorchestrated songs from other Final Fantasy VII media, such as Advent Children. And there's a lot of new music as well, which I won't play here. Some of the remade songs also include snippets of the original PlayStation 1 songs, which is such a great touch. Plus, there are in-universe vinyls featuring other remixes of Final Fantasy VII music like the Gold Saucer theme. You can play these vinyls on jukeboxes scattered about the city. Basically, the soundtrack of Remake is everything you loved about Final Fantasy VII's music and more. It is as much a part of Remake as it is a love letter to the original game. Visually, Remake is gorgeous. Main characters are incredibly detailed, and lighting effects are phenomenal anywhere you look. Certain sections are graphically impeccable, such as the Mako reactor. Remake does an incredible job harnessing the capabilities of Unreal Engine 4. However, there are a lot of moments where the game doesn't look spectacular. This mostly has to do with textures. Texture pop-in is pretty regular throughout, and there are plenty of low-resolution textures scattered about Midgar. I don't know if this is because of the engine, or because of Square Enix, or maybe even a little bit of both. Or it could be another matter entirely, such as a glitch or a bug causing higher resolution textures not to load in properly. Dragon Quest XI had pop-in, and it ran on Unreal Engine 4 as well. But Final Fantasy XV also had this problem, and it ran on the proprietary Luminous Studio engine. This isn't really a huge deal, but it bears mentioning. It's probably the most glaring issue with the game overall. Something I really love about Remake's visuals, though, is how it near seamlessly transitions between pre-rendered cutscenes and real-time cutscenes that feed directly into gameplay. The original Final Fantasy VII kinda does this too. For example, here's the intro scene with the train. Notice how the visuals on the train kinda pop when transitioning from FMV cutscene to static gameplay background. Remake's take on this is to have the scene with Cloud on top of the train be pre-rendered, and then obscure the transition into real-time rendering using a cloud of steam, and it's damn near, if not completely, seamless. And this transition back and forth between pre-render and real-time render happens constantly throughout Remake, just like in the original game, and it's fantastic. Performance-wise, standard model PlayStation 4 systems run the game at 1080p with a 30 FPS frame rate. PlayStation 4 Pro systems use a 2880 by 1620p dynamic resolution while still maintaining a solid 30 frames per second. At most, the frame rate will drop down a single frame and then immediately rebound back to 30 FPS. As per the usual, I do wish the game ran at 60 FPS, but I'd rather have a solid frame rate than one that constantly fluctuates. Maintaining this consistent frame rate is important, not the least of which is because Remake's new combat gameplay really depends on it. Combat is the most dramatic departure from the original. Remake's battles are in real time and occur directly on the overworld a la Final Fantasy XV. Pushing square delivers a basic attack, and pressing triangle activates a character's unique skill. You only control one character at a time, that character primarily being Cloud. However, by pressing the D-pad, you can switch to other party members as need be. Each character is a unique archetype that suits his or her skill set. Cloud is well-rounded, Tifa is incredibly quick, Barret is a tank, and Aerith is a magic user and healer. The ATB system is back, being tied to abilities, spells, and items. You build ATB meter over time, but you can build meter faster by having productive offense. To cast magic, you need to equip materia. The basic materia system is identical to the original. Equipping materia grants the user access to magic spells and/or certain bonuses. Equipped materia levels up alongside the character it's equipped to, which then grants more potent effects. Abilities are character-unique maneuvers that are tied to specific weapons. Once an ability has been mastered, however, it can be used with any of that character's weapons. A few of the abilities are even throwbacks, such as Braver now being an ability instead of being a limit break. Speaking of, limit breaks return in all their glory, and are much the same as the original. Receiving damage raises the limit break meter, and when the meter is full, that character can unleash a devastating finishing maneuver. In essence, the new combat system is an action RPG take on the original game's battle mechanics. All the familiar tropes are present, but reimagined for modern times. However, there are some quote-unquote new mechanics as well. Remake's weapons can be upgraded, similar to Final Fantasy XIII. However, upgrading weapons in Remake is much more straightforward. Where Final Fantasy XIII's upgrades required you to infuse items into your weapons, Remake only requires you to use the SP you earn each time you level up. Remake's combat also features a stagger meter, again, not unlike the one seen in Final Fantasy XIII. Attacking enemies raises the stagger meter, with some attacks being specifically designed to increase stagger. Once the meter is full, the enemy becomes susceptible to increased damage. Mastering this meter is an integral part of the gameplay, as certain enemies cannot be defeated without becoming staggered. There's actually a lot about Remake that's akin to Final Fantasy XIII. In a weird way, Remake almost seems like the game 13 should have been from the beginning. There are a lot of linear sections, the combat is very flashy and full of particle effects, even some of the locales look similar, like the scrapyards. And the first time I saw the weapon upgrade menu, I thought, hey, that kinda looks like Final Fantasy XIII's Crystarium. I guess what I'm trying to say is, on a very surface level, Remake and 13 have a lot in common. However, Remake succeeds in a number of ways that 13 does not. Compared to 13, Remake has a lot more open areas to explore, and you land in these areas earlier in the game. These places are also teeming with life, so they don't feel barren and desolate and are actually fun to explore. Plus, the characters are all very personable in Remake, with a lot of relatable traits and entertaining interactions. Remake has moments of levity that allow the dramatic moments to sink in even more in contrast. Perhaps the biggest success, though, is that Remake makes sure to explain the world of Final Fantasy VII to the player in-game, rather than forcing the player to read data logs. I actually think it's really interesting that 13, one of the most divisive Final Fantasy games, in a weird way influenced the remake of 7, one of the most beloved entries in the series. Looking at Remake's gameplay overall, it's great. It masterfully adapts the classic mechanics of Final Fantasy VII with the new mechanics and presentation of an action RPG. It also brings back a few great ideas from other Final Fantasy games, namely Final Fantasy XIII, but with some different execution. While some purists may not enjoy the new combat, I personally found it to be very engaging and fun. It's hard to say just how much I love Final Fantasy VII. The original game is such an integral part of my life, and I know it inside and out. I owned the game multiple times over, with digital copies on every system that it came out on. I even bought Remake twice, once digitally and once physically. And honestly, I think Remake is great. It takes everything you loved about the beginning of Final Fantasy VII and gives it broader scope and deeper content. The best parts of Final Fantasy VII's Midgar section are the best parts of Remake. Aerith is phenomenal on all fronts, and the city of Midgar itself feels so much more alive. Taking off my rose-tinted glasses as much as possible, I think it's still plain to see that Final Fantasy VII is amazing, and Remake follows suit. It's not perfect, there are some parts that may be hit or miss depending on what you're looking for, but it's still Final Fantasy VII, and I still love it. Now I'm just waiting for Part 2. Final Fantasy VII Remake on PlayStation 4 earns a 9.7 out of 10. Once again, please subscribe and click the bell icon to get notified whenever I post new videos, and check out the content on screen, specifically my Final Fantasy VII retrospective and my Final Fantasy XIII retrospective. Thanks!